This video will cover everything you need to know about getting involved in and conducting research. This will be a pretty detailed video since I not only want to be thorough, but equip you with the knowledge of research that will help you beyond getting into medical school. Research is an important aspect of medicine that I can guarantee you will be a part of someday, so it is good to start learning about it now. First off, what exactly is research? It's basically the process of confirming or denying a hypothesis using the scientific method. So you ask a question and try to answer it through experimentation. There are many components of research, but the important things for you to know is that every research project has an abstract, which we will talk about later. Projects can be published as abstracts by themselves or as full-fledged papers, which is probably what most people think of when they hear research. Speaking of publication, the reason why biomedical literature is so well respected is due to its thorough peer review process. When you try and publish something, it is sent to anonymous reviewers in the field that will basically tear it to shreds if it isn't adequate, which will cause the journal to reject the work. There is also a way to measure the importance of a particular journal through something called an impact factor. It's basically a measure of how much the papers that are published in a given journal are referenced over the last few years, so some journals have more prestige than others. But even if you don't publish, you can still showcase your work through other means such as presentation. While you are more than welcome to do both, there is no rule that says you can only present published research and vice versa. As we go through this video, keep these basic principles in mind as you think about what your end goal in research is. So why do medical schools care about research so much? Well, I think this image on the right does a pretty good job of showcasing what benefits doing research can have. However, I think there is more to it than that. Beyond these things, research is an opportunity for a student to show creativity in either how they experiment or present the material. It also shows medical schools that you are able to go beyond critical thinking. Doing research will teach you all about how to ask good questions, which may seem silly to say, but there are so many questions that have yet to be answered. A majority of those unanswered questions haven't even been asked yet, or rather, we just don't even know what to ask yet. When penicillin was first discovered, we didn't even think to ask about bacterial resistance to them until decades later. Essentially, research is a beneficial thing for you to have as a pre-med student for all of these reasons and many more. According to a survey the AAMC did of incoming medical students, around 60% completed research of some kind. Just keep in mind that the majority of students chose to do research, meaning you should probably try to get involved too. But how? If you are in college, it's actually pretty simple to get involved. First, you just need to make sure that you do well in a pre-med class. Once you do that, you have leverage to go to that professor and ask to be a part of their lab since you're interested in whatever subject they are looking at. But guess what? If you are able to do well and stand out, the professor might be the one reaching out to you instead. You only have to accomplish this in one class, by the way, because once you are in a lab, that's it, that's your ticket to research. Research is different than something like volunteering or shadowing, where you want to try and get as many hours as possible doing different things. Good quality research happens over a long period of time through trial and error, and in most cases, it will all happen in the same lab for you. So just get into that one lab and you will be set. Also, what's great about getting into a lab run by a faculty member is they are probably already familiar with the research process and will have a lot of the tedious things already set up and finished. Okay, let's pause for a second. Let's say you either aren't in college right now, or your college doesn't have that many opportunities for research. Another option you have is to apply for a summer job or something similar at a healthcare center as something like a clinical research assistant. Academic medical centers, or basically hospitals that have a medical school attached to it, are the easiest to get research opportunities since they are required to do research yearly. So, keep that in mind when trying to find the best place to get such an opportunity. Now, I know that I said most professors will already have things set up for you if you join them, but in the sake of being thorough and in the off chance you have to start fresh with them, I'm going to go through the entire research process. This will actually be good for you to know when you do research in the future as well. Okay, so the first thing you should do when interested in research is look at what is already published. My old mentor told me that the best way to learn how to write research is to read research. This is also important for understanding what questions need to be asked. The last thing you want to do is ask a research question that has already been studied before. The first link on the right is to PubMed, which, if you haven't heard of before, is a massive database of biomedical research. It is a great go-to database where you can look for most published works in any field. Once you get an idea of what's already out there and get some inspiration, try coming up with a hypothesis that either hasn't been studied or has incompletely been studied. Once you have a project in mind, there are two things that need to happen. First, you will probably need to complete some form of CITI training if your research involves human subjects. Second, you will need to get approval from the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, before proceeding with your project. I have put in the link where you can register with CITI to do their training in case if you need a quick way to get there. Even if you join a professor that already has IRB approval, you will need to complete this training, so it's best you know how to get there. The next step is deciding what kind of research you want to do. I have listed out examples of different kinds of research and ranked them based on how strong the evidence of any findings would be. A meta-analysis is the strongest because it is a study where you analyze already vetted and published results from a number of different studies to try and answer a question. Literature reviews are also strong, but these tend to be more passive projects that don't necessarily argue anything, but instead just inform the reader about existing research. Randomized controlled studies are the strongest of the experimental studies, where you randomize the groups in your study to certain treatments or experimental protocols that you can compare in the end. Cohort studies can be experimental or observational, but there isn't any blinding or randomization going on, so it's not quite as impactful because there might be potential bias in the results. Finally, case reports are another option for you, since that's essentially taking the case of one person and publishing an entire study about how they presented and what was unique about them. While these methods may have different strengths of evidence, they are all equally as impressive to medical schools, so if whatever group you are joining needs to come up with a research question, keep these options in mind for what you can do. When you start to write research, you will have to do an abstract at some point. You can think of an abstract as a very detailed summary or outline of the entire project. The reason why abstracts are interesting is not only because they go at the beginning of papers, but you can actually publish or present abstracts by themselves. This is because abstracts, while short, include the results and conclusions made by the study, so there is material there worth reporting on. In fact, if you do present any kind of research, which we will talk about a little later, you will probably be asked to submit your research in the form of an abstract. Now, it is important that you write an abstract either after all your data collection or after you have written the entire paper if you plan on publishing a full-fledged paper. Since it has components from every part of the project, it makes sense that the project has gone to completion before trying to write it. Now, one thing I'm going to do in this video to help illustrate what each section is and give you all a reference to look at is I'm going to be referencing a paper that I actually published with my group before I entered medical school. For instance, here's the abstract for that paper. You don't need to worry about what it's over. The point of me showing it to you is so you can visualize what an abstract looks like, how it's written, and what all goes into it. For each section I show you, I will keep this PubMed link at the top, which you can use to go see where the paper is. One final note, I'm also keeping the written out version of the reference at the bottom in case if you ever need to write out a reference. I talk a little about how to reference things during the resume video, but here is another instance where you can just look at this for comparison. Okay, let's look past the abstract and get into the bulk of the research. You may not have to write a full paper just yet, but I'm going to pretend like you have to so that when the day comes, you will have this resource to come back to if you ever need help. The first section will be the introduction, and it might be the most tedious section to write. This is because it requires a lot of digging into already published research. You are essentially doing a mini literature review to talk about the topic you are researching. If you don't know what a literature review is, let's go over an example. Let's say I am writing a paper about how diabetes affects people's mental health. I will start my paper by first broadly discussing what diabetes is and what impact it has on the population. Then I should mention mental health and how diabetes may tie into it. In other words, you start very broad and you narrow down to the question you ask at the end of the intro. In addition to a hypothesis, you will also have a purpose statement in your introduction where you discuss what the point of the study is. Here is an example of part of the introduction from my paper. We were writing about factors that influence misdiagnosis of a rare disease if you need context about what the paper is about. Notice how every sentence or two has its own source that I am referencing. This is important for the introduction because the mini literature review serves to show not only that you know what you are talking about, but that the information you are giving about your topic is credible. Chances are you won't have much experience with citing multiple references on a paper like this, and that's totally okay. Whatever group you are working with will probably be doing most of the writing at the stage you're at, but it's good to get a citation tool that works with Microsoft Word so that you are prepared. I personally use EndNote, which I have added a link for, but it's super convenient. I can download papers straight into EndNote and directly into Microsoft Word. When I put in the reference, the tool automatically cites it for me in whatever format I want. Definitely check it out. Moving on, we have the methods section, which might be the most simple. It is the part of the paper where you tell the reader how you conducted the experiment, what variables you were looking for, and what subjects you included. You will have to say what specific things either qualified or disqualified people from entering as participants, as well as describe what population you are looking at. Any variables or things you want to look at that might be hard for a reader to interpret need to be defined. For instance, our paper involved creating a clinical timeline that illustrated important dates during a given participant's clinical course. So, as part of the methods, we had to define how these timelines were made. At the end of the methods, you will have to describe what kind of statistics were conducted on the data to get the results. Now, don't worry about this part too much, because usually when data is analyzed in research, it is sent off to professional statisticians that write out this part for you, but I just wanted to let you know that it is part of the methods. Okay, next we have the results, and it's really important you do not add any commentary into this section. That will come later. Think of the results as being very black and white. You are just stating what the results were and offering any tables or figures that you have created for the project. Each of your results needs to include a p-value, which if you aren't familiar with statistics is basically just an indicator that tells whether a result is significant or not. Here is a portion of our results section where you can see p-values and references to tables we made. Finally, we reach arguably the most important section, the discussion. In addition to including the conclusion, the discussion is where you get to interpret the results. Why do they matter? Why should people care about your project? What questions are raised from this study? Things like that. In fact, you can also be a little presumptuous in this part and offer your own solutions to whatever problem you are looking at. As an example, one paragraph in our discussion talked about how developing a certain tool in the electronic medical record might help in reducing misdiagnosis. You should really try to get creative in the discussion because it's where you tell the reader what the next steps are. The discussion should also include a paragraph about limitations to briefly mention confounding variables or biases that may have impacted the results, but make sure this is like the third paragraph from the end. You don't want the reader to end thinking about what problems the paper had. And we finally made it to the end of all the different parts of a research paper. But what if you want to present either a full paper or an abstract? Typically, when you apply to present something, the event will ask for an abstract over the paper or project that you worked on. One great opportunity to present at might be Student Research Week, which I know a lot of colleges host once a year. You can also apply to present at local or national conferences. Although the cost might be a little high since you have to travel, these experiences are definitely worth it if you are ever given the opportunity to go. You also have the choice to present with a poster where you just stand in front of the poster and talk about your projects to people walking by, or in front of a panel, which is like the more formal presentation with a podium at the front and a PowerPoint you've created. Regardless of how or where you present, it's very important you practice many, many times. If it's a poster presentation, think of practicing something like an elevator speech that you can say over and over again as people walk by. If it's a panel presentation, it might be 10 to 15 minutes long, so make sure you practice in front of family or friends. Do not just wing it. The worst thing you can do during a presentation is trying to find the right words to say and end up stuttering or pausing awkwardly. The last thing I want to talk about is how the publication process works. You will need a primary investigator, which you might hear called a PI. This is a faculty member that can essentially sponsor the costs of the publishing and ensure the credibility of the paper. It is assumed that this is the person that oversees the project, and as such will be the last author listed on the paper. The first author is usually the one who came up with the idea and did most of the work, while each preceding author is in order of contribution. You will need to find a journal to actually publish in. This means doing some research on what journal might fit whatever you are writing about the best. Each journal has its own guidelines and formatting that you will have to follow, so once you pick one, make sure to edit the abstract or paper accordingly. Okay, I know this was a pretty long and comprehensive video all about research, but I wanted to go through it all, so no matter what stage of research you are in, you can always come back to this video as a tool. If you are in the application process for med school and you haven't necessarily published anything, but are working on research nonetheless, that is still very impressive. It takes a lot of trial and error to publish something, not to mention the incredible amount of time. Be proud of yourself for just trying to get involved in the first place, because that by itself is already impressive for you as an applicant.